All right, welcome everybody. I'm Brian. I'm founder and CEO of Reforge. Today we have an awesome presentation and demos for you from Sachin, who I'll introduce here in just about 1 minute. Before we get started, I've got a few thank yous. First, huge thank you to our co-host, NextView Ventures, Rachel and Rob up here. If you can give them a round of applause. Yeah, we can give them a round of applause. I've actually known the founders of the firm since my earliest tech days. They have been one of my biggest supporters. They have funded multiple companies. If you are a founder in the room and raising a seed round, 10 out of 10 recommendation, and I do not give that to all of my former VCs. So just to let you know. Second thank you is to Stifel. Emma and I believe Shreya are here. If you want to raise your hands, right here is one. Thank you for all the contributions. They've really helped make this event possible. And of course, thank you to Carta for lending us this beautiful space. Also, big Carta customer there as well. So round of applause for Carta. And then one more final thank you before we get started from Zendesk. And I just wanted to invite Derek up here, who's going to say a few quick words before we get started. Derek's right in front of me.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. I'm Derek. I am the Americas team here at Zendesk and really appreciate the sponsors of this event for inviting us to the space. Just wanted to do a quick plug. If you are a startup founder and you are interested in our program, we have a 6-month free trial for us to use the Zendesk solution, which is a customer support and CX solution, and is jam-packed with AI features, which is probably the topic of discussion today. So thanks, everyone, for having us, and have a great time.
A couple more words before we get started. So if you're unfamiliar with Reforge, for the past 10 years, we've been trying to unlock the insights from the world's best operators and bring them to everybody else. We originally did that in the form of courses, but a couple years ago with AI, we had the opportunity to start embedding all of that knowledge into an incredible set of tools, which we now offer for product teams. Today from Sachin, you're going to see some, of course, incredible stuff that is enabled by AI and prototyping, which can mean a bunch of different things. What he's going to show off today takes you about 4 to 5 different tools to actually piece together, which he'll show you. Starting today and tomorrow, we're actually opening up a beta to Reforge Build, our AI prototyping tool specifically built for product teams who are working on existing products. So you'll be able to iterate on your exact design of your product. It'll include all your context and knowledge about what your product does, your features, your target customer set. You'll be able to generate variations with a single click. You'll be able to share, collaborate, and vibe code along with your team members, and then validate instantly with our AI user interviewer. All in one flow, all in one tool. If you all want to check that out, it's called Reforge Build. We'll send out a link afterwards, but if you want to get a jump start, you can go ahead. You can just go to reforge.com/build. Once again, we're opening up the beta. We did just about an hour ago. And if you have feedback for us, we'd love it. We have a couple different team members here, Tom and Twen, if you want to raise your hands right there. We always love feedback on all of our stuff. Also, Twen reminded me, we're hiring. So if you're an engineer, we are hiring, please. I know as everybody else is, but we'd love for you to check us out. All right, with that being said, I want to introduce Sachin Rekhi. I've known him since very early in my career. He is one of the most talented individuals I know. He blends 3 really incredible skills of just raw analysis, coding, and product knowledge all into one person. So when we were thinking about tackling topics like prototyping and just how to use these tools to be productive individuals in our work environment, how do we really enable these superpowers? There was just nobody better that we could have thought of. He has a couple amazing courses on Reforge, including one around AI productivity. What you're going to see today is a very small taste of what's in that course and a bunch of other stuff, but he's going to go deep with you and then answer a bunch of your questions afterwards as well. So if everybody could give me a big round of applause for Sachin. Welcome, Sachin.
Thank you. All right.
I'm excited to talk about one of my newest favorite topics, this idea of AI prototyping. So let me give you a sense of what I want to cover in the next 40 minutes. I want to start by making the case for prototyping, why I think every single one of you, regardless of whether you're a PM, a founder, product designer, why I think all of you should be prototyping yesterday, but if not today. And so I want to make that case first. Then I want to talk about, if I've convinced you that prototyping is something we should all be doing, I want to talk about how can you become great at it. I develop a framework, which I call the AI Prototyping Mastery Ladder, which really teaches you the essential skills at figuring out how to do prototyping well. And so we'll talk about that. I then want to spend the majority of our time going through a demo showing you how to use today's prototyping tools effectively. We'll then talk about how to actually use prototypes on a day-to-day basis. And then finally, I want to talk about the many great tools that now exist for AI prototyping and give you some quick recommendations on where to start, because it's already becoming pretty confusing given the tools in the space. We'll leave plenty of times for questions, so definitely think of your questions as we go, and we'll take them at the end. All right, so let's jump in. I want to make two arguments for why we should be all prototyping. The first is the evolutionary argument. So when I started my career at Microsoft as a product manager, I used to write 30-page specs for the smallest little features. That was the name of the game. That's what we did. As an industry, we've evolved since then. What happened was we got to great maturity on our design tools. Now, these days, everyone's using things like Figma, but even back then, we started to use Photoshop and some of these other tools for design. And what we ultimately realized is a picture is worth 1,000 words. And today, when we look at how teams really specify products, they certainly have a spec, but they also rely heavily on design mockups that are annotated to really communicate to all of their stakeholders what they actually envision building. And that's because these designs are way higher fidelity than you can get to in words. Now, prototyping is just the next evolution of that. A prototype goes beyond a mockup by adding interactions, by adding interactivity into those experiences, maybe even adding functionality. And that increases the fidelity even more. And so we're now able to communicate at a higher fidelity with our teams. And so in that sense, I see this evolution from sort of a largely only having a product spec to now doing product spec and design mockups to now even having prototypes as the key way we're communicating with our own team, communicating with executive stakeholders, as well as communicating with customers to really validate our ideas. And so I just saw this tweet yesterday where Jinsu Park, he's a lead designer at Notion, literally last week said, I attended a design crit today. No one shared work via Figma. Everything was vibe-coded prototypes. And so what we're seeing is organizations are moving fast to this new medium as the way that they're communicating. They're having design reviews, they're meeting with execs and using these vibe-coded prototypes as their medium of communication instead of the static design mock-ups of which is quickly going to become yesteryear. And so that's the evolutionary argument about why we should all be prototyping. But now here's why I'm particularly excited about it, which is what I consider the revolutionary argument, that I think prototyping has the potential of changing the way product teams function. So let me talk about how teams traditionally work. The way they traditionally work is you start by prioritizing customer problems, right? And you put it on the roadmap. You're like, hey, we have a customer pain point. Let's prioritize it, put it on the roadmap, and have and build something around it. Or maybe you have a user experience that's not really working and it's time for a redesign, so you prioritize the problem. Now, once it's prioritized on the roadmap, you then get to work as part of your roadmap to go build a potential solution. So at that point, you're like, okay, what can we build that's better than what we have today? You start going through design reviews, you start doing some customer validation, but you've already prioritized the problem. Now, this is traditional prioritization, but let me tell you exactly how the best teams work. They don't actually do that. They do something instead called product shaping. The idea here is that what they do is they instead build a bunch of prototypes for potential problems that their customers are experiencing, test those prototypes, and then prioritize on the roadmap the most successful prototypes. Now, this might sound subtle, but this is very different than how typical teams work. The reason this is important is you're prioritizing problem solution pairs. You're prioritizing a problem and a solution that you know has worked because you prototyped it and you tested it with customers. Then you're putting it on the roadmap. And so that's a very different way to do prioritization. And my favorite example of this is obviously Apple. Everyone's heard about the Johnny Ive and Steve Jobs. They're in the lab together. Johnny Ive comes to Steve Jobs and shows him this multi-touch interface on a tablet. And he's like pinching and pointing. And Steve says, this is pretty cool, but you know what? I think this would be better on a phone than on a tablet. They shelved the entire tablet project and went on to create the iPhone. Right? And so that's an example of they made the prioritization decision based on the prototype and what they thought the prototype was capable of, instead of just prioritizing, we should go build a tablet, we should go build a phone. And that's what the best companies do. Now, why doesn't everyone do this? It turns out running an expensive prototyping lab where you're going to throw away 90% of your prototypes is insanely expensive. Most of our organizations could never justify that. But here's the thing. AI prototyping completely changes that. Now with AI prototyping, we could all be making throwaway prototypes, picking the best ones, and doing that as fast as the way we do it today, waiting for our designers to come up with mockups. And so that's where I think we can all move to this world of product shaping and change our prioritization process based on it. So I hope I've made the case why prototyping is important. If I have, I want to talk to you about how I think you can go about actually building prototypes. So it's this really interesting thing going on, which is prototyping tools are incredibly easy to get started with. But frankly, that's half the problem. So some people get amazed when they open up a tool like V0 here. And they say something like, create a traditional CRM application that allows me to track contacts, customers, and opportunities. Now, what's initially amazing is you're looking at this and you're like, wow, it literally built an entire CRM app that I can look at. I can see my records. It even built a dashboard. I can add new items to it. And it did that in a couple of minutes without me writing a single line of code. And it wrote pretty great JavaScript front-end code for me to go do that. So in some ways, this is impressive. But I've come to really see this as AI slop. And the reason is this lacks branding. Could you ever imagine shipping a product that looked like that? Of course not. It lacks any differentiation. If you think about the way AI works, it looks at probabilities of if you were to create an average CRM app, what would be the core capabilities of those apps? We're not in the business of creating average apps, right? And so this has no differentiation. And it lacks depth. It creates the surface level workflows, but it doesn't go deep into the key workflows that end up being the ones that matter for our products and services. And so this is where, like I said, it's easy to get started with these tools, but it's actually tough to master them. And so I've been thinking about how do I help product managers, founders, designers get really good at this task of AI prototyping. And to do that, what I did was come up with what I think are the 15 essential skills that everyone needs to master to become great at prototyping. And I sort of created a hierarchy here because it turns out you have to master the basics before you can move on to becoming to the intermediate level or the master level. Kind of like craftsmen, oftentimes they work in this way. And so I even label them as apprentice level skills, journeyman level skills, and craftsman level skills. And so let me preview what I think are the core skills that people need. The way these prototyping tools start is by prompting. So you spend most of your time prompting in English to have it generate code on your behalf. And so we want to be thoughtful about the kinds of prompts we're doing. We then spend most of our time actually editing our apps, right? You fire off a prompt and now we're trying to refine it and improve it. And so we can talk about the multiple ways of how to edit to do that effectively. Now, one of the biggest challenges, which we're going to talk about, is design consistency. I showed you in that previous screenshot here, this doesn't look anything like the kinds of products that we build. We want our prototypes to look and feel like our existing products. We want them to incorporate our design guidelines, our design systems. And so I want to show you how you can actually go and do that. So design consistency becomes very important. Now, we shouldn't be building these things in a silo. We should be collaborating with our designers and engineers. And I think learning the skill of how to do that is pretty important as well. And frankly, learning the limitations of when not to design, not to reach for a prototype, as well as what tools you should go use. Now, as we move up, we get into the realities of what happens when anyone starts prototyping. You hit a bug, right? And it turns out if you're non-technical, you can't just go modify the code. You have to figure out what to do there. And there's a couple of techniques we can use for that. Versioning, debugging, and learning how to debug as a non-developer is a core skill. Now, there's other key things here like diverging, which is this idea that, hey, I don't want to just take the first idea in my head and build it. I want to use AI as a thought partner to come up with multiple design variations. And if you're doing that, then you're starting to use AI well. And finally, I'm not going to touch on all these, but functional prototyping at the master level, we can make these prototypes go beyond experience prototypes. We can even make them functional, that they can actually be usable by our customers. And that takes testing and customer validation to a whole new level. And so these are the 15 skills I think we should try to master to really become good at this AI prototyping skill. And so what I wanted to do right now is focus on 4 of these, specifically design consistency, diverging, functional prototyping, and customer validation. And I wanted to show you some quick demos of exactly how you can go about doing this. Okay. So let's start with design consistency. So there's multiple ways to achieve design consistency with your prototype. This is the idea of how do I even make the prototype look like and feel like my existing product? And so I want to teach you right now the very simplest one, which is importing your existing design. And so the idea here is you start by bringing your existing product design into the prototyping tool, and then you start prototyping on top of that. The reason you do that is when you start in that way, the AI, when it builds new features, fully leverages the design that's baked into the base product. And so that's why we want to go do this. Now, there's a couple ways to do it. I'm going to show you the simplest way, which is doing it from a screenshot of your existing product. But another really common way is Figma imports. So I show screenshots because every single prototyping tool supports importing screenshots. Many of the prototyping tools import via Figma. And then the last way is via your website. Some of the prototyping tools even let you leverage a browser extension to import the CSS and HTML and JavaScript directly from your actual live product. And so tools like Magic Patterns and Alloy do that third approach. But that's the least sort of accessible across the various tools. And so I want to show you how to do that from a screenshot. Okay, so let me pull up the demo here. I'm showing one of the many prototyping tools out there, Bolt. I'll talk about all the tools that are available out there right now, but I'm just showing you one of them, Bolt. The way these prototyping tools all start is with a blank text prompt, and you get to put whatever you want in it. Now, the way I always start is by importing my existing design. And so what I want to show you is for my product here, I run a company called NoteJoy. It's a note-taking app for individuals and teams. And so we're going to start by importing the existing design of my product. And so all I'm saying here is please recreate the attached screenshot of NoteJoy. And so all it is this screenshot, which is just a screenshot of our product, typical note-taking app with a sidebar, a note list, and a note content area. And so I can just fire that off. And so now it's going to go start building my prototype for me by trying to extract all of my design guidelines directly from the screenshot of my product. All right, so these tools take a little bit of time, so I don't want to waste time in the demo showing you, but I had already preloaded that exact query. And you can see right here what it came back with. All right, so we're looking at the prototype that was auto-generated just by that simple, please recreate this for me. Now, okay, it's got some things right. It's got 3 columns, it's got a sidebar, it's got a note list, it's got kind of a note content area. So on a high level, it did a decent job. But if we move back here, the styling is not exactly right. The colors aren't perfect. The borders aren't exactly right. And so what I can start doing here is start to modify this to look more like my actual product. And so let me give you a very simple example of what that might look like. Okay, let me copy this query here and paste it. Okay, so all I said here is set the sidebar background color to a particular hex color, set the note list background color to a specific hex color, and set the note content area to a specific hex color. And so you can be very prescriptive here and tell it exactly what you want it to do. And so it's going to go modify the code, find exactly where it needs to update the CSS, and you can see it's come back, and now it's updated the colors to now actually look closer to my product. Now, the other thing you'll notice here is, again, hard to see in the back, but there's like border lines between each of these that you don't typically see in my actual application. So I can again find that prompt here, say, paste that here, and I'm just saying remove the border top and border bottom from each of the note list items. Now, it's helpful if you know a little bit of CSS and the terms around it, like a border top, a border bottom, because you can feed that directly to it, and it'll know exactly what you mean when you're trying to update it. And so now it's going to go ahead, remove those borders from the note list items, and we'll see that come back. Or you can see, for example, this add note button isn't fully rounded, and I might want to change that. One of the cool things is there's a selection tool here where I can actually select various elements of the UI. And so I'm going to select the actual add note button. And now when you're prompting, it's only going to modify the specific thing you told it to. So in this case, I'm going to say make fully rounded. Okay, and that's going to fire off and make that button rounded. And so you can get a sense for all these little changes I can go make to make this look and feel like my exact product. And the reason I want to do that is I did that here where I spent probably about an hour making those kinds of little edits to get it to look exactly like my product. And so now you can see the styling and the design looks far closer to my exact product than before. Now, the reason this is so helpful is the key thing is you only have to do this once. And in fact, only one person on your entire team has to do this. Because at this point, we can establish what I call a baseline. And so here, we now have a baseline prototype that has my sort of base functionality, has my styles incorporated into it. And at this point, all future prototypes I can build on top of this particular prototype. That way, all of my designs are incorporated into the prototype. Now, what's great about this is you can make this base prototype shared across your entire team. Now, anyone can start with this as a baseline. And so that's why I always encourage people, take the time to make your baseline look great, because only one person on the team has to do it, and everyone else can get leverage for all future prototypes to have design consistency. And so now I can start actually building features on top of this. And so the feature I want to show you guys is, let me bring this up here. Okay. So what I want to do now is, one of the common requests we get in NoChoy is to actually, wouldn't it be great if there was an AI feature chatbot inside of NoChoy where I can ask questions in my notes? And so lots of our users have been asking us, I'd love to have it summarize a note or help me find specific information in that note. And so they want an Ask AI feature in NoChoy. We've been thinking about building this, but we're not quite sure our specific target audience really wants it, because we have small businesses and non-tech professionals using us. So, we're kind of wondering, is this only a thing that tech people would use, or would this be useful outside of tech? This is a perfect scenario for prototyping. And so I want to show you how we can build a prototype to actually do that. And so let's see here. Okay. So I gave this a very simple prompt. And what the prompt said is, I want to build an Ask AI feature into NoChoy, and I want that feature to allow people to ask questions of their notes. It should then take the note context and the question and answer it with an LLM. That's literally all I wrote in the prompt. And so I want to start to show you what you can get. And I particularly asked it for multiple entry points. And so you can see here in the bottom corner, it came up with a floating action button, this little purple icon, as a way to activate the feature. It then also came up with, in this top right corner, this Ask AI button as well. And so let me kind of click that. And so you can see here, we now have a chat bar that was created inside of our application. Now, keep in mind, now we're seeing the benefit of all that baselining. I provided no styling information. I didn't tell it to make it gray, make it black, choose those fonts or colors. It simply realized if that's your base application and you're asking me to add a new feature, of course I'm going to inherit the design patterns of that core application. And so now we're getting prototypes of features that look and feel exactly like our application, exactly what we ultimately built. And so that's the idea here of actually building a prototype using a baseline. And so we could keep going here, but what's nice is I can start asking it questions like, can you summarize this note? And it's going to go fire off and came back with mock data. And so you're starting to see that this is actually already higher fidelity than a mockup, right? Like showing that Ask AI sidebar, sure, a mockup could have done that. But then having some of the interactions here where we're actually showing the chat messages, we're showing the loading ... as the LLM is thinking, and then we're actually showing you what a response would look like. We're getting higher fidelity into the interactions in way less work. Like, in fact, this took less time than it would take a designer to make static mockups. And so that's where starting to move our mockups to prototypes ends up being incredibly valuable as a way to iterate faster on our various ideas. And so that's the idea of baselining as well as creating new features on top of it. All right, I want to now talk about the next skill, which is this idea of diverging. Now, as I said, one of the common ways I see people using prototype tools is I have this great idea for a feature. I just need to use the AI to get that idea out. Now, that's okay, but I think that's a poor use of AI. In fact, when I think about the best experiences I had as a product manager working with my designers, it was the riffing. I'd come up with an idea, they'd come back with 3 different variations of that idea, and then we'd have that conversation, and then we'd settle on something that it was even better than the conception I had in my head. It turns out AI can be an effective design partner if you know how to use it that way. And so I encourage you to think about this, that we should diverge, come up with multiple design directions for our features with AI, and then eventually we'll converge on the very particular idea that we think is great. And so that ends up being really important if we're using these tools well. I want to show you a little demo, taking you back to my LinkedIn days. So I used to work at LinkedIn, and one of the things that I thought we should always build is like a news feature that wasn't about the global news. So right here, you see sort of this global news top stories, which is just what's trending in general. But what I care about is news in my network. What's buzzing amongst my connections on LinkedIn? Because that's the world I live in, that's the industry I live in. I want news very particular to my industry. So let's say I'm at LinkedIn, I want to make the pitch, like, hey, we should build a news and network feature. Let me show you how now I think about doing that. Before, I might write a PRD or come up with a product strategy or whatnot. Now I just prototype it, show it to some people, maybe bring it to some execs and go from there. And so I want to show you how you can use these tools to do that. So I'm showing you right now another one of the great prototyping tools. This one's called Magic Patterns. And the first thing I had it do is what I always encourage you to do, create a baseline. So all I did was take a screenshot of LinkedIn, and the prompt here is please recreate this screenshot of LinkedIn. And so you can see here, it's done a pretty decent job of recreating the core homepage experience. It has stories in here. It has the sidebar items. And so I have my core LinkedIn experience recreated purely with that simple prompt. Now, if I was motivated, I could do what I showed you before, make all the corrections and improvements to really make this look and feel like an exact product. But I'm just going to move on from now to show you how you might actually start diverging with this tool. So the next prompt I'm going to bring up here is Magic Patterns has this great feature they call inspiration, which is specifically built to give you multiple variations of a given idea. And so I added a prompt here saying, I want to add a feature on the LinkedIn homepage called News in Your Network. I want to explore multiple designs for this. It should show the top articles most frequently shared by my network with the people who share them, as well as provide their commentary on those articles. So it's sort of like a mini spec of what I want in the feature, but it's very high level. I'm not like specifying exactly what to show, but we can see what it came back with. When you use this inspiration command in Magic Patterns, you get 4 different variations by default. And so we're seeing this new post that shows up that shows news in your network. It's showing me an article, has a big hero image. It's showing me exactly what Sarah Johnson, someone in my network, said about it. And it's letting me find 8 other comments. Now, if you think about this, what's remarkable about this is it looks and feels like a native LinkedIn post. It has incorporated all the design from that baseline, and I don't have to do anything to specify borders, background colors, fonts, shades, any of that. I'm simply getting a design variation very simply. Now, the beauty here is it came up with multiple variations. And so if I click here, it's now come up with this sort of hero card, news in your network, showing me a card style layout of what that feature might look like. And so very different than the status update style. We then have another style here. Where's this style? Okay, yeah, so it's showing you a news in the network sidebar item. And so here it's sort of inspired by the top news over here, but then showing you what if you use that sort of design treatment in building this feature. Again, completely different design direction compared to the other ones. And then finally, it goes to another status update here with a sort of tabbed approach and showing the comments as sort of chat bubbles. Now, none of these are perfect, but we have diverged completely in many different directions with a simple prompt. And we've gotten lots of different ideas that now we can start debating with myself, with my designers, with my engineers, and we can say, well, what's the pros and cons of making it a sidebar item or a top card or a status update? And so that is really the value of how quickly you can get to multiple design variations. In fact, again, quicker than I can often ask my designer to do. And so that's what I love about this. Now, certain tools like Magic Patterns and Reforge Build both support this come up with multiple variations built in. Here it's called inspiration. Reforge Build calls it variations. And so it's fantastic. It makes it really easy to do. But I want to show you that you can do this in any tool, even if it doesn't have explicit support for it. So I'm going to go back to Bolt. And here I had a very similar prompt, which was I want to add a feature on the LinkedIn homepage called News in Your Network. And I say, I want to explore multiple designs for this. That's all I had to say. And so what it did here was it created that newsfeed item, but you can see in the top right corner, it has this little design drop down. And so we're currently on the detailed design layout, but it came up with a compact design. And so that's the design variation that it came up with that's compact. It came up with a card style layout. And so now we're seeing these nice big cards. And it also came up with a timeline view. And so you're seeing that we can get variations even out of prototyping tools that don't explicitly support variations. And that's pretty important. The other thing you'll notice, this is kind of surprising. We got very different design directions from Bolt than we did Magic Patterns. It's sort of weird because all of these tools use Claude's foundation models, but we get different ones. And so actually, this is something I often do where I'll get 3 variations from Magic Patterns, another 4 variations from Bolt, or another 5 from Lovable, just to give me more surface area of ideas. So then I can start diverge and starting picking and choosing amongst them. And now it's easy to pick one prompt to start perfecting it, improving it, making it look exactly like what you want. So that's the idea of diverging. Okay, so now I want to talk about the next skill, which is the idea of functional prototyping. As I've shown you so far, mostly what I've emphasized is experience prototypes. What that means is we're trying to make it so you can see the look and feel of the product. You even have interactions, so you can open and close the ask sidebar and things like that. But we can take these prototypes to the next level and make them fully functional, meaning we can have them actually do real user behavior. We can have them make API calls on our behalf. We can have them store data in a database. We can even have them add login and registration. All by prompting, we can add all those capabilities into our prototype. Now, the reason this ends up being really important is we can now start to test, in particular with customers, a lot more of these ideas. And I think that's amazing. In fact, we can even do behavior instrumentation into the prototype. So now I'm getting into customer validation, but we can hand this prototype to a potential customer. We can add data analytics to it. We can add session replays so we can watch everything that they're doing in it. We can even add heat maps to understand where they're clicking. And if you think about this, advances the art of customer validation relative to a design mockup so much. Now, of course, we could do this before, but what did we need before? We needed engineers. We had to move this beyond the PM and design realm to the engineering realm to go build this. But that feels very wasteful of engineering resources when they're focused on actually delivering the core product that's already been validated. And so this enables us as founders, as PMs, as designers to start doing deep customer validation of our functional prototypes well before we even get engineering involved. And so that's the power of functional prototyping and customer validation. So let me show you what that looks like here. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done that here where I built a fully functional prototype. Now what I can do here is once you have your prototype, you can publish it, and publishing it just makes it accessible at a public URL. And so you can use a custom domain if you want, or you can use the Bolt hosted domain. And so now here's my full prototype. And again, keep in mind, 100% prompted. I didn't write a single line of code. I didn't even look at the code. And so now I have a functional prototype. And so I can open up the Ask AI feature. And so I added a little test note here. I don't know if you guys remember, Lenny did a great interview with Brian Chesky, and it kind of exploded because he said something about product management being dead. And so this is that interview. So let me use this Ask AI feature to sort of answer that question that sort of Brian posed. Let me type that up here. Okay, so I just typed, did Brian Chesky say that product management is dead? Oh, great. I got an error saying that I've exceeded my quota. Oh, and I need to give OpenAI more money. All right, I've used up all my credits. Luckily, I already ran this query and have it open here. The short answer is no, Brian Chesky didn't say product management is dead. Phew, we all still have jobs. He clarified that quote was taken out of context. But so now what's great here is we are playing with what the feature would actually look like. I told you I wanted this Ask AI sidebar that could summarize notes. It's literally taking the note context, sending it to an LLM with my question, getting back the data, and presenting it in the UI. And again, I didn't code a thing. This is all prompted. I even added this little drop down. It's hard for you guys to see, but I'm like, let me play with a different couple models. So I told it to add a model selector. And now I have GPT-5 versus GPT-4.1. And so I can even have it, and so I had it answer the question 4.1. Here's the funny thing. It says, great question. So if anyone knows the model differences, the old models used to constantly praise you. And that's what you can see is happening in 4.1. In 5.0, they're much more matter of fact. Short answer, no. And so we're seeing some of the differences in the models. And the beauty of this is that I can do this all with just prompting. I said, hey, add a model selector, add these two models into the UI, and let me choose between them. And so now I am able to actually see what the output is. And so before, this would have taken going to engineering, having them implement it, start testing once we got further down the pipeline. But now even earlier in the process, I can actually start testing these. And so that's the value of making your prototypes functional. And I can do this with customers. I can hand this to a customer. Now imagine me handing this to a customer and say, hey, you can now create your own note in here and try the Ask AI feature on it. And then tell me, was that useful? Would you have found that helpful? And so this takes customer validation way further. And I want to show you how I've added some customer validation capabilities in here. I set it up so now when I press the X, I close this out, I get a built-in survey. And so survey has popped up asking me how likely are to use the Ask AI feature if launched in NoChoy. I can say never, a couple times a year, monthly. So let me say I'm a big believer, I'll use it weekly. And then I can say, could you describe a personal use case where you think the Ask AI feature would be helpful? And so I've instrumented the survey directly into the prototype, and so I can send that out and it can start to get additional feedback. And so I want to show you additional ways that I can get feedback as well. So I've actually incorporated analytics directly into this. And so I'm using a tool called Posthog. You can use anything you want, whether it's Amplitude, Google Analytics, or whatnot. But I happen to like Posthog because it has a generous free plan and it supports a lot of different styles of analytics. And so we're seeing basic analytics here. I can see daily active users, weekly active users. I can do some retention analysis. So I can start seeing, hey, when people are using my prototype, do they ever come back? That's hugely valuable ever before we build a product to decide, is this thing going to have any retention at all? Now, another cool thing I can do is build specific analytics here. I can say, I want to know anytime someone presses the entry points or sends off a chat message. And so typical instrumentation you'll do in an analytics tool, but keep in mind to add this, all I did was prompt. I went to Bolt and said, hey, can you add an analytics event anytime someone presses the Ask AI button? That's it. And so then it went and did the integration of Posthog and all that. And now I have analytics integrated into this. Now, the other great thing is that I mentioned you can do session replays. So this one might be hard to see, but okay, you can see sort of that red mouse floating around as the user is clicking around. And so this is an actual session replay of the people who are playing with my prototype as they're clicking around what they're doing. This is incredible from a customer validation perspective. So our design team can look at this and look at all the lossy clicks and the things that may not be adding friction to the experience. And again, this is all possible in a prototype. Imagine doing this in a design mockup. The final thing I want to show you is you can even do heat maps. And so of all the users that have used my prototype, I can see exactly where they're clicking. And now this gives me evidence of like, hey, look, everyone seems to press that Ask AI button in the top right. This floating action button in the bottom is getting no use. Hugely valuable to have those insights well before we ever go build the product. And so now I'm getting this again, just from the prototype. Now I can go refine this feature well before we hand it off to engineering. And so this is the power of functional prototyping combined with customer validation to really take our prototypes to the next level. Okay, so I've talked a lot about how do you actually build a prototype. I want to briefly talk about how do you use a prototype. So once you have a prototype, what do you do with it? So there's three key stakeholders we want to use prototypes with. The first one is kind of an obvious one, but I think people forget it, which is with your own team. The beauty of these prototypes is that you, your designers, your engineers, your PMs, the founders should be building these prototypes simply to play with them themselves. Because as you're playing with it, you improve the experience. And this quote from Steve Jobs comes to mind. He says, there's a tremendous amount of craftsmanship in between a great idea and a great product. And as you evolve that great idea, it changes and grows. It never comes out quite like it started because you learn a lot along the way. You find there's tremendous trade-offs that you have to make. There's certain things you can't make electrons do. There's certain things you can't make plastic do or glass do or factories do. And this is the value of prototyping earlier in your journey, getting it in the hands of your team, dogfooding it, using it, and improving it based on that. It's far easier to do that with a prototype than it is with a design mockup. With a mockup, you kind of look at it a couple times and you move on, but here you're playing with it, and that's improving the look and feel and the experience and all those design trade-offs that we have to make. And so that's the first use of prototypes. The second use is with executive stakeholders. We're starting to see organizations that actually bring prototypes to exec review meetings. And those are really useful. My favorite example of this comes from Duolingo. So most people know of Duolingo as a language learning app. But what you might not know is they also build a chess learning app. This was a recent app that they built. Now, as you imagine, it was kind of controversial for a company like Duolingo to move into chess. What does chess have to do with language learning? Now, an enterprising PM and their designer really thought Duolingo should get into chess. So what do? They did not write a spec. They did not do a product strategy. They created a prototype. And so they started prototyping using Cursor and built a prototype of what would a chess learning app look like. Now, what they believed and what they were able to show is some of the core concepts of their language learning app, which is puzzles and spaced repetition, could be equally useful for learning chess. And so they prototyped those screens. And they said, okay, we're going to show you how to learn a little bit of chess, and we're going to do spaced repetition, and we're going to do these puzzles. And they brought that to the exec team. And the exec team had the same aha moment the team did. This looks and feels like a Duolingo product. This leverages the secret sauce behind Duolingo. I believe they could have never done that with a spec. And so this is the power of prototyping your ideas, bringing it to the leadership team, and using that as a way better way to convey your ideas than just a traditional doc or even a mock-up. And so I think that's the second core use case we want to be thinking about. The third is customers. Of course, we want to put these prototypes directly in front of customers. Now, let me make real why this is so important and why this is so much better than a design mock-up. My favorite story of this comes from, I'm dating myself, the Sony Walkman. Anyone remember having a Walkman? Okay, yeah, no, definitely dating myself. So there was this device called a Walkman that let you actually listen to music on tapes. And what's interesting about this is at the time they had a black Walkman. That's it. And they thought, let's build a yellow Walkman. They thought it'd be sportier and fun. So they run a focus group. They invite people to the focus group. And at the focus group, people are like, yeah, it's more fun than the black one. It's sportier. Oh, the black one's kind of boring. This is what people said. Now, what they then did is at the end, they said, thank you for all your feedback. When you walk out the room, you can pick any Walkman as a gift. They had black ones and yellow ones. Here's the thing. 100% of people picked the black one. 100%. No one wanted the new yellow one. And the team initially was so confused. Wait a minute. You just said the yellow one was sporty. You said it's not boring. And yet everyone walked out with the black one. Which data point do you think they learned more from? Turns out what they walked out with. And this is the idea that user behavior beats express preferences every time. When you actually see the user behavior, that's what matters, not what people say they will do. Now, prototypes finally ensure you're getting user behavior. You put the prototype in front of them, you just let them play with it. You see what they do. That's way better than having a customer validation call where you show them a mock-up. What do you think? Do you think you'd ever use this? Do you like it? That isn't real validation. Prototypes get us to real validation. And so that's how I want to think about on how you can use this with customers. Okay, so the final thing I want to talk about is all the different tools out there. The AI prototyping space has absolutely exploded in terms of tools. I'll start at a high level. There's kind of three really broad categories of tools. The first set of tools is really made for designers. These tools basically add AI to the Figmas of the world, right? So they make it easy to now create designs via prompts, which is quite useful. But what I'd say is they don't get you into functional prototyping. And functional prototyping is really useful, but generally I encourage people to skip these designer tools, because the other tools let you do functional prototyping and they're just more useful from that perspective. So I encourage you to look at these tools in the middle, which we're going to talk a lot about, which are really sort of oriented around product managers. The final set of tools on the right-hand side are associated with engineers, things like your Claude codes, your cursors, and whatnot. Now, here's what I'll say. Those tools are great prototyping tools. They're even more useful than the product management-oriented tools. The thing is, they do require you to be a little bit technical. And so if you have a technical background, go forth, use Cursor, use Claude Code. If you don't have a technical background, these middle tools are perfectly great and do a ton for you, and you don't have to worry about being technical. And so that's why generally I recommend for the broadest set of people, this middle set of tools, which I'm going to go into detail on. Now, there's a ton of tools in the space. There's 5 tools. If I were to recommend which ones you can feel good about starting with, these 5 are all broadly available, have been around for a while, have all of the core capabilities that I list out here, and they have meaningful traction, so they're not going anywhere. And so these are the 5 that I think are really interesting. Now, let me tell you a quick snippet about what I think about each of these tools. Bolt was the first tool I showed you. I love Bolt personally because it's fast. It's just super fast to prototype in. And you'll find there's this round trip time when you're prompting and waiting. I'm a pretty impatient guy, so I happen to like Bolt for that reason. The second tool here is V0. This tool is fantastic at front-end UIs. If you're really focused only on user experience, V0 is quite good at it. Another tool here is Replit. Replit is fantastic at building robust prototypes. I mean, you can build full-on apps with this thing. So if you want a database, you want back-end control, and you want full control of it, Replit is the one to go. Now, that comes with a cost. It is a bit slower than these other tools. So even though you get the control, you give up some speed. And so you really want to ask yourself, do you need all that back-end functionality, or are you just trying to build an experience prototype? Another great one here is Lovable. Lovable has really made its name on being non-technical. I've seen lots of business users create really cool apps that are full vibe-coded apps using Lovable without knowing a line of code. So from the non-technical perspective, that one's a great one. Magic Patterns is one of the apps that's really focused on product managers and designers. And I showed you one of the features I really like, that inspiration feature around it. Now, the space is exploding, and I wanted to give you a couple call outs and tools that are up and coming that are also going to be really interesting. We heard Brian talking a little bit earlier about Reforge Build. What I particularly like about Reforge Build is that it incorporates the context of your product team into the actual process of building your prototypes. You know, when you think about it, like, I ideally want my product spec in here. I want my product strategy conversations here. I want all of that in there when I'm building a prototype, but most of these tools operate in a silo. Reforge Build brings that to you as you're actually building your prototype. Another great one here is Figma. Figma has built a product called Make, which is their own prototyping tool. This is going to be a favorite of designers because designers are already living in this tool. And so I think that's where they're going to get the most traction. There's a new tool that just launched last week called Alloy. It's pretty cool in that it helps to recreate your existing design at a very high fidelity. And so I tried it out and was able to recreate the Nocho interface extremely accurately. And so that's kind of their claim to fame. And then the last two I just mentioned because Google has their own tool called Firebase Studio. So if you're in the Google ecosystem, you want to check that out. Similarly, Microsoft has one called GitHub Spark. Again, if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem, you might already have access to these tools, so they're worth checking out because of that fact. Okay, to wrap up here, I give you a very, very kind of lightning session around 4 of these different skills. But to really become great as a prototyper, we want to master all 15 of these skills. Now, where do we go from here? I'd encourage you to look at each of these skills and start thinking about, okay, how do I figure out versioning? How do I figure out debugging and whatnot? And that will really enable you to up your game when it comes to prototyping. Now, I am teaching a course actually starting next week that specifically goes deep on AI prototyping. In fact, we go through each of those 15 skills, teach them, provide demos on each of them to really help you up your game on prototyping. The course is called AI Productivity, and it's not just about prototyping. It's about how do I help product managers in particular to gain leverage with AI tools. We're going to teach you how to actually do all the deliverables you're responsible for as a PM using AI, whether it's prototyping, customer feedback, data analysis, product strategy, and execution tasks. And so I'd encourage you to check this out if you guys have any interest. And the cohort is actually starting next week. All right, I'm going to now open it up for questions and invite Rob here to join us for the discussion.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, round of applause. I don't know what to do. That was awesome. If folks have questions, I will run the mic over to you. And if you don't have questions, I'm going to ask questions, but they're not going to be very good. So please kick it off. Somebody. All right. Oh.
Thanks for the talk, Sachin.
Yeah.
One of the skills that you put up there on the mastery side was in engineering handoffs. Do you have any guidance on that?
Yeah. The question was specifically around engineering handoffs and any guidance I had on that. So I have a bunch of thoughts on this. I'll give you the cliff notes. The first one is prototypes are really good for discovery, not delivery. What do I mean by that? We get a ton of customer validation from a prototype, and that's going to help us to build a better product. But if you're sitting there thinking, oh, great, let me hand this prototype to my engineers, they're just going to take that code and throw it to production, never going to happen. And in fact, what ends up happening is it's usually easier for them to rewrite it because it doesn't meet the robustness, scalability requirements, maintainability, all those things that we expect from an engineering perspective. So I think that's the first thing I want to call out. Now, there's interesting things people are doing on that handoff. I'd say right now, there isn't an established norm. I see 3 different things people are doing. The first is they take their prototype, they hand it to their designers, and then the designers create pixel perfect mockups from it. Now, the challenge with your prototypes is that it's really hard to get them to be pixel perfect. You'll find that you're prompting, and you can never get them to be pixel perfect. If your organization demands pixel perfect prototypes, you're going to have to then take the prototype. You can even export many of them to Figma and then have your designers finalize it. And then the finalized Figmas is what you're handing off to engineering. Now, another common model I'm seeing is people do hand the prototype directly to engineering, and the designers come in afterwards and say, hey, okay, you got most of it right. Let me just file some bugs to get the final set of sort of design bugs fixed. And that ends up being useful. Now, where I think this is going is we're starting to see production components being used in prototyping tools. This is the holy grail, because at that point, those components are the same components your engineering team is using when they're actually building the app. This is in the infancy. There's very few prototyping tools that support it. Today, you mostly have to use Cursor and Claude Code to accomplish it, but I think it's going to become huge. And at that point, we'll finally see the leverage where even delivery is sped up by prototyping.
Thank you so much. Awesome talk. I had a question. We know from Cursor that it's important to kind of split chats and agents. And you mentioned that when you build the baseline, you need a couple of iterations to get to that baseline. So I'm wondering, do you fork chats, or are you kind of scared of hallucinations at some point? How do you do that?
Totally, yeah. So there's this whole section in the course on versioning, which is this exact concept of forking, where all of these prototyping tools, just to revisit the question, it was really about this idea of do you end up having sort of too much context and do you need a fork? And yes, I'm constantly doing this where I'm forking because I'm about to begin a new prototype and I want to leverage the baseline. And that's the common one. But actually, the Cursor context issue is also very real. If my chat gets long, I start getting lots of bugs. And so I will fork just to clean up the chat stack. And so then I can start actually building on top of it. So we end up sort of forking just to clean up the stack quite a bit, even in these prototyping tools. They have the same curse as Cursor.
Thank you. Super interesting so far. I actually wanted to respond to the forking thing. One thing that I found helpful is in the first pass, have it actually build out a component library instead of fully duplicating the site. And then from an editing perspective, it's also easier to say the specific button I wanted to change. And then by the time you're building out multiple pages of your site, then you can just kind of riff off the same centralized library. My question was around actually your embedded LLM. Had you done the work to already input your OPI key for OpenAI and the post-hoc API as well?
Yeah, great question. The question was around how did I do the integration with third-party APIs, specifically OpenAI and PostHog. So when I went in there and said, hey, I want to integrate a LLM, when I made it functional, I specified I want to integrate with OpenAI and specifically GPT-5. It then went and built it and then said, I've added a line to your M file where you can put in your API key. And then you can just hop over to the code view and then drop in the API key. Even if you don't want to do that, you can literally in the prompt say, here's my API key, and then it will go put it in the right place. And so it will prompt you on what it needs. And in both of these cases, I had to provide the appropriate API key. But what's great about it is it makes it step by step, so you can just provide that context.
Awesome presentation. Thank you so much for sharing all those wisdoms and knowledge. Prototyping with AI. With vibe coding and all those tools, it seems like the barrier to entry for building software, it's getting lower and lower, and it's becoming easier and easier. Even nowadays, I feel like some people have a little bit coding capability, might be able to do that. But where do you think that if the technology will keep evolving and getting better, how do you think about the future of maybe say B2B SaaS? Is it still worthwhile to pursue that direction versus I would think if a relative medium-sized company could have their little bit internal team and learn how to use it, and they can build a really tailored internal tool instead of relying on third party to do it for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. The question is, given how easy it is now to vibe code apps, what does that mean for the industry, especially industries like B2B SaaS? Very big question. Lots of things we could talk about there. I think what's interesting is that I think there's multiple things that are going to happen. First, there's definitely going to be the personalized app ecosystem, that anyone who needs a personalized app can now finally build it without a huge engineering team. And I think that's going to unlock a lot of customization. We already see teams building internal apps. This is simply going to explode that to the next level. And I think that's great. And I think that's going to be awesome. Now, I do think we're still going to have larger and larger players in this world. It's not going to just turn into sort of a cottage industry of really small apps. And that's because I think we've always had different moats that have enabled large companies to continue to become larger. And I think we're figuring out what those moats look like in the AI era. You know, some people talk about data and how if you can suck up all this data to create an even more effective B2B SaaS tool, maybe that gives you a leg up and a network effect that you couldn't get if you were just building this on your own. There's best practices, there's distribution moats that people are building out. And so I still think there is, while it's gotten a lot easier, I still think we're going to see kind of larger players continue to exist, even in spaces like B2B SaaS.
Have you had any pushback from engineering teams? And if so, how can you handle the rejections?
Yeah, great question. The question is, do you get pushback from engineering teams? Yes, and that's why I started up front with this stuff is great at discovery, not delivery. I think the hard part is I've seen some PMs hand this to their engineers and be like, great, here's the code. That will never work. And that's going to give you a lot of pushback from your engineering team. So don't go in with that. But what I'm finding is that when you can work with engineering on this, it does let you get to better implementation specs because they actually can see behavior. We've all had that experience of someone's engineer sees a design, then they implement it, and then they have like flyouts that you didn't expect, but that's because it was never specified in the static mockup. And so you can actually create a better engineering spec with these prototyping tools. And I think that's the way to think about it. I think the next realm is going to be leveraging real engineered components in the prototyping tools, which is going to get engineering even more excited.
Thanks so much for the talk. You're so articulate. It's amazing. My question to you is, what are you differentiating between prototype and an MVP? And what I'm hinting at is, I'd like to address the V in MVP, right? So when you build a prototype, which has happened with me, where I'm building a platform, I'd like to have, for example, a paywall on it, right? And so I built it prototype using one of the tools that's listed in your slide deck. I'm not gonna say the name, but it's very, very lovable. And it crashed after 50 users. So and I think also given the environment that we're in, where there's so many AI-driven tools, you can build anything and everything in a matter of 20 minutes. How do you differentiate between all of them when you get results that are not necessarily what you want for working, viable?
Totally. Great question. So the question was about how do I think about AI prototyping relative to launching MVPs? So there's a reason I call all this stuff AI prototyping, because I'm trying to say, again, that this is about discovery, about discovering the right product to build for our customers via prototype. I distinguish that more broadly from vibe coding, which is like launching a full-on application that you're looking to get actual users that are using on a regular basis. Now, vibe coding is here and it's here to stay and it's getting better every day. My personal belief is prototyping is 100% viable today. There's no doubt in my mind. Vibe coding has the kind of challenges that you're describing, which is, hey, look, how do we make sure this has no security issues? How do we make sure that this thing won't crash? How do we know it's scalable? Those will be solved problems, but we're not quite there yet. On the prototyping side, no brainer. All these tools exist. It's just a matter of whether your team has adopted it yet. And so that's how I think about the difference. Now, you can blur the lines. Like you might call my functional prototype an MVP because I could put that in front of users and they're actually using it. So I think the terms are quite tough right now, but are you using it for discovery? Then I consider a prototype. Are you using it for delivery? Then that's vibe coding.
Hi, Sachin. Thank you so much. This has been super insightful. Could you share a little bit about kind of AI prototyping in the context of teamwork? Because I started doing AI prototyping with Figma Mate, and it becomes a very lonely work because you're like, it's easy for you to prompt the prototype, but it's harder to collaborate with your designer now. So I'm trying to figure out how do you best leverage this to still have that good teamwork dynamic. Kind of who's doing what.
That's a great question. The question is, how do we make this prototyping not a solo experience, but a collaborative experience? I agree with you. A lot of people default to a solo experience. Given that, like I even added a whole module in the course around designer collaboration. How do we make this collaborative? And so I'm seeing a couple of different ways this happens right now. So first, there definitely is the solo route where you're building a prototype, then going into a conversation with your designer, and then you start kind of going back and forth on it. And in fact, the designer will often finalize it through Figmas, but you at least jump-started with some ideas. So that's one, but that's still kind of solo. The middle one is the one I like the most, where I'm now actually seeing teams where the PM and designer are in the prototyping tool together. All of these tools support collaboration, where you could be prompting on top of each other on the same prototype, just like with Figma. And so what they're now doing is they're collaborating on the design in sort of this shared prototyping tool. And so I love that because you're seeing back and forth happening. In fact, what I see is the designers are better at tweaking than PMs typically, or even founders, because they have a little bit of that sort of design language, CSS terms that they can use to go make those tweaks. So that's a great way to go. And frankly, the third way I'm seeing is actually designer-led prototyping. There's a bunch of designers now that are embracing these tools, and they're the ones that are in their prototyping. And they're finding, again, they can iterate faster than they can iterate in Figma. And they're working with their PM to sort of talk about what they're going to iterate on, and then they're the ones who are executing on it. And so I'd encourage you not to make it a solo experience because, like I said, having thought partners is the whole reason we can diverge and come up with better solutions. But yeah, the first proclivity everyone has in this tool is just to build the whole thing themselves.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming and for the great questions. Thanks again to our host, Carta, and our sponsors, Zendesk and Stifel, and to Sachin and for an amazing presentation. Thanks so much for coming. I think we can stick around, right, for a bit, for 15 more minutes. So thanks again.